We are live, Your Worship.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. I'd like to call this regular Council meeting of April 22nd, 2025 to order with adoption of the agenda as amended. I would like to move up our in-camera presentation to 1:30 time slot, which should be just after our Governance Committee recommendations. So someone want to make that motion for me? Councilor Lucial, Councilor Cherry, all in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of April 8th. Someone want to make that motion? Councilor Palmer, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. And adoption of the special council minutes of April 10th. Councilor Cherry, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from the regular council minutes of April 8th? Seeing none, any business arising from special council minutes of April 10th? Seeing none, I'm just going to move right on to announcements from the mayor. So we have an emergency preparedness town hall coming up 5 to 8 p.m. on May 7th, is that?
Yes.
May 6th at the community center. So just encourage people to come out if you're interested in how we are preparing for emergencies in our community. Would appreciate you being there. Secondly, I want to congratulate the Grizzlies, Revelstoke Grizzlies, on their incredible year. Grateful that they brought us as far as they did, and congratulations to the Grand Forks Bruins for sweeping that tournament. Mayor Everett Baker and myself had a bit of a wager going on. If the Grizzlies won, Mayor Baker would be wearing my jersey. However, because the Border Bruins has won, I will need to be wearing his jersey. And that jersey is on its way here. I'm hoping that it'll show up before the meeting's over, but he had assured me yesterday it should have arrived first thing this morning. And while we're talking about hockey, I had a request from a member of our staff that we be no later than 4:30 today, because apparently the Leafs are playing. And so I just want to, I just want to make that notice, because I know that would drive somebody crazy. Leave it at that. On a sad note, we had a longtime employee, Diana Graham, passed away this past week. Diana was in our employ for 35 years. She did all kinds of things for the city, probably one of the first female employees in Public Works, but she worked in parks and was in City Hall for a time. Her funeral service will be held this coming Sunday at 11 a.m. at the community center. And if anyone knew Diana or her husband Howard, just encourage you to be present for that to help support the family. All right, we are going to move on to recommendations from the committee, Governance Committee recommendations. Ms. Floyd, any oversight prior to us getting into these recommendations?
Thank you, Mayor Solis. I don't really think we need much of an explanation. I think that council, when these recommendations come up, both you, actually all three of you, Councillor Stapenhurst and Councillor Palmer, were all present and can probably provide input from a council perspective.
Great, perfect. All right, do we have any one of councillors want to put the first recommendation on the table for me, please? Councillor Lucial.
The Governance Committee recommends to council policy C-5 entitled Policy Management be approved as amended.
Second for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, Your Worship, just some clarification questions regarding this policy C5. Will the city it mentions in the policy that the city will be maintaining a list of council policies. Regarding policies that are reassigned as administrative policies or existing administrative policies, what what will the process be for making those available to the public, maintaining those, and in addition to maintaining any future revisions that may be made to the policy?
Okay, thanks for the question. Ms. Floyd, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Marcel. Through to Councillor Orlando. The intent is to have two separate policy books, one council, one administrative. The reason why we're recommending that the administrative ones be pulled out are because they are operational. So typically they would be available for council, but they are not public facing policies.
Follow-up, Councilor?
So the policies won't be available to the public.
That is not the intent, no. The policies will be available to staff that they're directly related to, but not to the public.
Has the committee, and through the chair, it might be a question for the committee, has the committee considered having a registry of administrative policies that may have public-facing considerations? And one thing, and just to make a reference to the next item on the agenda, another, practices recommendation in relevant local government legislation is to distinguish between what is, clearly defined as administrative kind of policy areas as opposed to those with a political dimension. So when I look at the next section where we're referring a bunch of policies to the administrative side of things, I mean, my feeling is a number of them, and including ones we've changed in the past and ones that might change in the future, fall into the latter category. So I guess my question is, has the committee considered recommending that these administrative policies, including be made available somewhere so that people are clear on what the policy is? So like staff might not even know what the policy is, or I'm not sure how it's distributed to them. Relevant policies that are relevant to council members, how do we find those ones? And as well as, in addition to that, changes to those administrative policies. So for example, we have dress code, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion policies referred here. If changes are made, how will the community be aware of those types of policies?
Do you want to weigh in at all, Ms. Floyd, or?
Sure. Through to Councillor Orlando, these policies will be managed by the CAO and the Human Resource Manager, and they will disseminate them to staff as changes are made.
And so from my perspective, I don't see why we can't have a list of these standard of contact, all that we've got here in front of us, just listed the way they are, so that if somebody was concerned about them, then they could discuss that with staff in whatever way. But we could have that so that if somebody was concerned about standard of conduct, we know that's P1, that's an administrative policy. Somebody could at least know that it's administrative and it has a policy to it. Are you okay with us doing that?
I would be happy to make a separate index for sure.
Yeah, that would be great. Councilor Palmer, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Mayor Souls, and thank you to Councilor Orlando for the question. The direct answer from my memory of the meeting to your question is we didn't really consider that. We were separating what was clearly, seemed to be clear to us, administrative versus the at the policy council policy level. And then we're dealing with some history and stuff like that. So the question of public accessibility to administrative policies is an interesting one. From my perspective, the council policy should be easy to find, should be in a place and people can go there, and that's for the benefit of everybody, including council staff, and it can make life a lot clearer in governance. For the administrative ones, even though in general there's sort of personnel nature, when I sort of think about it, I think all this stuff would be available through Freedom of Information. I don't think there's anything in here that wouldn't be available.
Right.
So then that begs the question, well, why wouldn't we just have them available? And so what I'm sort of wondering that maybe that's something for the governance committee to consider, possibly even a policy on the availability of policy. That sounds a bit bureaucratic, but it might be something to refer back and we can weigh in. So after we pass it, assuming we pass this one here, I'd be prepared to refer that question to the governance committee if that was for Councillor Orlando, something that would be.
Through the chair, if I may, I would be happier if we included that in the change we are making now for clarity. And as an example, for example, if somebody is applying for a job with the city and wants to review some of our policies around some of these questions, if these are transferred over to administrative policies today, they will not, as I understand it, currently have access to them. If changes are made to these policies by staff, as far as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the council will not be aware of them. Community members will not be aware of them, and I think just as an example, in section 2 or 3 there are several things like human rights administration, respectful workplace policy that I feel should be in the public view and should be available. For example, if a member of the community has a complaint, for example. So my question would be, can staff or committee members, governance committee members, make an appropriate recommendation to have that included now through a revision of the policy before?
Thank you, Mayor Solis. One of the discussions further to Councillor Orlando's questions, one of the items that we were talking about is getting clarity of the difference between council policy and administrative policies. And if I think the intent was on this particular policy was to deal with the council policy specific, the council policy. So that's why that title, council policy management and not administrative management. So I would be very reluctant to make that kind of change without referring it to the committee, because I think it starts to change the intent behind this policy. So I wouldn't be supportive of that particular change. Having said that, I through the chair, I do agree with Councillor Orlando that these should be available, and there should be some kind of standard process that people can see them. Probably they could be online for anybody to see. I would tend to be supportive of that philosophy.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any other comments from Council, Mr. Parman?
Well, this is one of the rare times where I completely 100% agree with Councillor Palmer on procedure. It hasn't been our practice to post our policies, both administrative and governance, in one complete list, either online or available to the public. It doesn't mean we can't. I think to Councillor Palmer's point, if someone wanted to FOI the community and ask for a copy of our administrative fairness policy, we would present it to them. If they asked for another policy and there was no reason not to withhold it, we would give it to them. So other communities publish all their policies. They just lump it together, whether it's governance or administration, because it's transparent. And the feeling is, and I can give you lots of examples, that if it's available to the public, just post it. It just hasn't been our practice. So if the governance committee wants to take a deeper dive in this, council decides on the drafting of policies. It's your governing authority to set the framework within the community. And B, if you want to post it online, that's your prerogative. So the short answer is you can just make this stuff available like other communities. It's just in the case of Revelstoke, we have governance policies available, but not administrative ones.
Okay. Appreciate the comments from all of you. So I think that we can have this discussion around the governance table, and it should be pretty, we should be able to do this without issue. But let's have that discussion first
Mhm.
and go from there. Any other comments?
Sure, yeah, Your Worship, regarding the policy itself, through the chair, maybe it's to
Yeah.
the committee or to staff. The section regarding processing of formal complaints, I'm a bit unclear if that refers to what type of complaint that refers to. Is that an individual policy or a complaint about a policy or a complaint about something related to staff? I'm not exactly clear.
So, Ms. Floyd, just for clarification on that, that's basically as a whole, but not just regarding the policy, is that correct?
Sorry, I'm not sure where you see processing complaints.
So policy manual C-5.0 procedures. So in the actual agenda, I think it's, and sorry, I'm clicking through a bunch of things. There is when you go to C5 council policy management link at the bottom there. And I'm wondering, if you look at the, I believe it's the third link of linked documents there, if that is, what is that related to? Is that, it addresses formal complaints. We do have a administrative complaint process policy in existence, but I'm wondering what this is a complaint about. Are they complaining about a policy change? Are they complaining about operations? Are they complaining about administration? What is this regarding?
The complaints, any complaints regarding how an individual is treated by the city staff or internally go through the administrative fairness policy,
Mhm.
which is a council policy, not an administrative internal policy.
Okay.
Answer your question, Counselor?
I'm sorry, no. Are you able to see, are people able to see the, part 3 of C 5.0 procedures where it says processing of formal complaints? So we have a separate policy for administrative complaint process. Is this different or the same or a new policy? How do those two policies relate to each other?
I think that this is probably more broad.
Mhm.
So if there's a complaint about how the policies are being upheld,
Mhm.
it would go through this. We'd review it at the corporate services level first,
Mhm.
and then it could go on to a referral if it was more. Typically, the administrative fairness policy is addressing a specific situation. So this is kind of more broad.
Further comment?
Your worship, no, but Council Palmer.
Councilor Palmer, please.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. We did have a little bit of dialogue on supporting documents being included on the policies. I remember sort of questioning it. So these are supporting documents. They are not the policy. And the idea that I recall from the committee meeting was that it was easy to make it easier for the public to find or council to find other information that's related to the policy as such. And so we didn't do a deep dive into those supporting documents specifically. They were already sort of existing. So basically, when I look at it in this short period of time, we have the policy. If somebody's got a complaint, then they can see this other supporting document that they can go to. Okay, how do I deal with this, and to provide clarity. I believe that's the intent of the supporting documents. It's not part of the policy itself, other than its supporting documentation. And through the chair, Souls, I guess just further to that, even if that needs to be tweaked, at least there's something here. If somebody says, okay, we're not following that, there's a procedure in place.
Yeah.
And for sure, there's always ways to improve those kind of things, but I think it's good that it does actually show that within the supporting documents. I remember not being a little bit uncertain at the committee level.
Yeah.
Just saying, okay, are we creating more clutter? And that was one of my criticisms of the policy. Some of them were just too unwieldy and too long that you have to get a PhD in something to go through it all.
Short and to the point is what I think you said.
Yeah, it's the same, yeah.
All right, any other comments? Council, Orlando.
Yeah, your worship, I feel that there's not really any loss in deferring this until we have clarity on how administrative policies will be handled. Looking at the next business item on the agenda, I have concern that we are not separating, in some sense, and this is, political opinion, things that are administrative and things that have political overtones. I think a few of those definitely sort of have an overlap. And my concern is that in the interim, we are going to, put all these policies somewhere where they are not viewable or understandable to the public, and that will be to the detriment of the city. Furthermore, the second part is that lack of, I think, clarity on complaints policy. I think complaints have been a source of stress for staff because they're not clearly defined by policy and how we move forward. So it's great to go through this process of revising our policies on this, but I don't think we have the amount of clarity we needed with those 2 points. So I'm wondering if the mover would be amenable to moving to defer to a time when both the council policy management and the administrative policy management policies are before us for consideration.
So at this point in time, we have a motion to approve the amended C5 policy. You want to defer everything in this. Governance Committee has looked at this, giving a list of separating the policies to council policies and administrative policies. And you want to defer it so there can be more wholesome discussion on the whole content of what's in each policy? Is that what, am I understanding that?
Not on the content of the policy, so that the overall, and this is just focusing on point 1 on the agenda, is so that we have the parallel administrative management policy available to us. Because I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if we refer some of these specific policies to administration, what is someone could arbitrarily determine that, hey, we're just going to get rid of that one and cancel it, and nobody would know, no one would be able to access it, that kind of stuff. So that's my with lack of certainty on how it works and what comes next, I would prefer to defer the council policy management one to a later meeting when we can also, after the governance policy has a chance to review its administrative policy management procedures as well.
Okay, so I'm quite willing to move forward with these things as they are here and have governance committee look at this internally in their next meeting. However, you've made a motion to defer. I will ask if there's anyone on council that wants to second that motion for item number 1. Seeing no one seconding that motion resolution will stay on the table. Does anyone else want to speak to that resolution? Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, just to wrap up where we were. So this is on council policy, not administrative policy specifically. And I think that it's certainly a good move moving ahead with this. And just a general comment on the policy. There's so many, and we're getting through these is why we have the committee and getting through them, because there's so many, and not to sort of bog down too much into the detail at the council table. I think because they just weren't getting reviewed on a regular basis. In fact, there were some problems occurring. So I think it's on a pretty good path, not a perfect path, but I'm supportive of this. And I think we had good discussion at the community level. Thank you.
Good. All right, one last time. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Orlando is opposed and balance of council is in favor. This motion passes. Item number 3. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Devlin?
I will move that the following policies be rescinded as council policies and reassigned as administrative policies as per the package, to quote Councillor Palmer.
And Councillor Palmer is going to second that? All right. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Orlando, you have your hand up?
I don't have my hand.
Okay.
Right away.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you. So we had an interesting conversation at the committee level on these, what belonged and what didn't. There was some that were, I guess, at the committee level, at least a little bit more debatable and weren't included in this list. And we'll be reviewing some of those further. In that blurred place on the sort of councils, the policymakers and the staff are implement, policy. That's one of the confusing things when we start to use policy at an administrative level. And so what is really just operational that we shouldn't be mucking about, and then others, for example, respectful workplace is one that is on here. And of course, council wants to have a respectful workplace. And one of the things that we say, well, there's so much legislation, there's so much stuff in here that it's actually a requirement, whether we wanted it to be respectful or not. And so it definitely goes into this. One of the other problems with the blurriness with administrative and council policy is how when things are changing legislation, that kind of thing. So that is why this really should be outside the realm of where we're doing. Some of it's it ties to collective agreements, the human rights legislation, that kind of thing. So that's the purpose behind it. Also, a lot of these are like huge documents. They're huge.
That they are. Any other comments? Councillor Orlando?
Yeah, in preparing for the meeting, Your Worship, looking at best practices, one of the dividing lines, and this is looking for UBCM policy papers between what is going to be a council policy and what is going to be an administrative policy, is strategic, ethical, or public-facing implications. Looking down this list, I see several of them that I feel are within the latter category and should remain as council policy. And so I think, moving through these as a block and moving them over is not the right approach. I think there should be some time to review these ones. A second best practice note is that if the policies are very outdated, which some of them are, that they should have a council review, or they should go through a review process here before being reviewed, because something that is super old and kind of not relevant does need a review. And if it aligns with both those priorities laid out in best practices as well, that should be done before that, before it is reviewed over. That's my feeling. So I do not support this as it is, and I would encourage other council members to think about things like human rights administration, diversity, equity, inclusion, violence in the workplace, respectful workplace. One of the policies, P9, employment preferential hiring treatment, quote unquote nepotism, it says here. All of these policies, I believe, have some. There's at least the basis of a strong argument that they should remain as council policy. So I don't support referring them over, especially when we don't really know at this point, have no guarantees if they're just not going to be available to us, the changes are going to be made, we're not going to be knowing, and that the public, such as somebody who interfaces with the city in various ways, will not have access to them. To put forward to say that they can be accessed to a freedom of information request is not a good way to do it. I'll say that right away. That involves time, money, staff time, staff money, and is just not the way to go on a policy which could just be available to the public.
Good. Comments are heard. I am going to say that the governance committee reviews these, trying to make a list of what's best. If we need to go down that, looking at each one to see if they're appropriate in this day and age, then we will do that. But also, I think, as I've stated earlier, you brought up that council should have them in public facing. We'll have that conversation at the level of the governance committee. Any other comments on the motion in front of you? Something different on it, or are you going to repeat that you just stated, Councillor? Would you go for it?
Point of order.
Go
Your
for
worship,
it.
in response to that, it's my understanding that because these are being referred to administrative policies, that they're not going to be back to the governance policy for review. These fall under the purview of administration. Am I mistaken? Are these going to be subsequently back to governance review committee for review? I don't think that's the procedure outlined here.
That's not the procedure outlined here. It was to make a list of administrative policies that would be administered by the administration and move it forward that way. However, you said you wanted some of these to be listed, or maybe we should list them all as Mr. Parliament has stated, so they're public-facing documents and people can look at them and they don't just disappear. So, any other comments from council regarding the motion? Councilor Orlando?
Your worship, just for clarity, maybe I misunderstood, but what I understood you to say is that the governance committee could review the policies themselves at a future date, which I don't believe is the case. If we're transferring them over to administrative policies, then that takes them outside of council purview, so they will not be administering them.
Yeah, so I misspoke.
Okay.
So that. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Note for the record, Councilor Orlando is opposed. The balance of council is in favor. This motion passes. I'm going to move on to item number 6.
Mayor Souls, if I may.
Yes.
Just to follow up from the conversation, just to provide clarity, I'd like to put a motion that the governance committee consider a policy regarding public availability or the availability of both administrative and council policies.
Okay, so I will second that motion. Discussion on the motion, Councilor Chair.
I believe council policies are already public facing, so do you need both in that motion? Just
It's either way, from my perspective, either way, we'll talk about it and say, there might be some tweaking on
okay.
the availability.
Then my follow-up question is, I want to ensure that council policies are going to be considered to no longer be public facing.
But no, those still remain public facing.
Thank you.
Missed that.
He just wants to ensure council policies remain public facing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because you haven't. Thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, Ms. Delaselle, is there clarity there with the resolution that Council Palmer and I just put on the table?
Yes, there is. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other discussion on this motion? Councilor Orlando.
Your worship, if I may, through the chair, just ask Councilor Palmer to elaborate on how he would understand the process to work. So this is trying to get the administrative policies question addressed at a subsequent governance meeting, or what sort of, maybe if you could flesh it out a little?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah, basically it's coming from the Councilor Orlando's, from some of your comments, which I agree. I agree 100% that the public should not have to do an FOI for access to this stuff. I agree with the principle that this should be available, readily available, ideally easily available on our website to anybody. And so without having spent a lot of time thinking about it in preparation for that, by referring to the governance committee, we may come back with a policy or might be some, we'll have that discussion at that time to from my perspective, to ensure those principles of open, transparent governance are upheld.
Okay. Your worship, if I would like to the chair, if possible, add an additional wording to that amendment, if it would be possible. And what I'm aiming at is that if these policies are policies that are delegated to administrative policies are reviewed or changed or rescinded, that there is regular reporting from administration on the changes that are being made so that council and the public are aware of those. I don't know how to word that, but I don't want, for example, what I'm trying to avoid is that the policy be put into the administrative realm, it is substantially changed or revised or canceled, and we are unaware of that.
So for your records, Ms. Delassalle, are you okay with us changing this resolution, or do you want an additional resolution covering what Councilor Orlando's just spoke?
I will defer to Ms. Floyd on that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Floyd, comment?
Mayor Souls, if I may, as
Yes,
a mover of
go
the
ahead.
motion.
Yep.
Could we have the motion read back?
Sure.
Because there might be a friendly amendment to this, if it makes sense.
Okay, Ms. Delassalle, can you read back that motion, please?
I will read back the original motion.
Yes,
That the
please.
governance committee consider a policy regarding the availability of both administrative and council policies to the public.
Including a friendly amendment, including the review process.
Including the review process, could you add that in, Ms. Delassalle? At the end of that resolution?
Certainly. That the governance committee consider a policy regarding the availability of both administrative and council policies to the public, including the review process.
Okay, you're okay with that?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Councilor Orlando, would you be okay with that?
Your worship, yes. I think it's, and I just want to speak to this, I think it's really important. I think if you look back 10 years with some of the struggles that the city has faced, one of the solutions to many of them is getting clarity on policy and becoming a policy-driven organization. So I do support governance review of policy. I think, though, that I'm concerned that this leads to less transparency, less awareness. So I'm happy to see that review happen. And really, just to put punctuation on it, my effort here is to support staff in this, to have them be supported with solid policies, with relevant policies, with current policies. So I'm happy to see it through, but these changes I think are going to be important to the city, important to our operations, and important to our goal of being an employer of choice.
Any other comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion is carried. Okay, we're moving on to item number 6. I want to be cognizant of time because we have presentation people waiting. Councilor Palmer.
I move that policy P5, employee superannuation purchase of service, be rescinded.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Lusal,
I'll
any
speak.
discussion on this motion?
I'll just speak briefly. It's all covered under the superannuation programs. We want to actually have an option of that.
All right. Any other comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Number 7, Councilor Palmer.
I move that policy P12, financial disclosure for municipal employees, be rescinded.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Staplener's discussion on the motion. You want to elaborate?
Yeah, so just, again, it's covered under provincial legislation.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilor Orlando?
Just for clarity, so disclosure will still be required, it'll still be included in the Sophie report as it currently is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item number 8, Councilor Palmer.
Move that policy P22, guidelines for working during COVID-19, be rescinded.
Second for the motion, please, Councillor Cherry. Further discussion on this motion?
So just speaking to the motion, basically, probably changed a whole bunch of things. We don't want to review that whole history, and it's no longer applicable that sense. Thanks.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, did you have a comment? All those in favor? Motion's carried. All right, I would like to go in camera pursuant to 90.2B of the community charter. We are going to do a presentation in camera. We will then resolve back to our regular council meeting and then go back for the balance of in camera at the end of that. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Orlando, Councillor Palmer, all in favor? Motion is carried. We'll take a couple-minute break to get our guests in, and then we will come back in camera.
Can you mute, please? Can you?
No, we don't need to. I gotta leave.
From here, so could be this year. Defense is strong, goaltending is strong. I mean, I didn't get called this year, but that's okay. Wait for next year. You always need the emergency rule.
Yeah, so like. Is that SDR report, is that we're referencing rentals or kidney problems?
Kidney problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was seeing real everywhere, I was like, man, like, am I going back to the dialysis center? Like. Who read that one? Come on, man, just look. We got all that praise for getting the zoning bylaw. Joins the existing one, the
It's 2081.
Can you hear me now, Ms. Delisle?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
We are now ready to go back into our regular meeting. If you want to start the live stream.
You are up.
Great, thank you. All right, council, let's get into our agenda here. Bylaws 9A, Municipal Ticket Information System Amendment Bylaw number 2408. Man, oh man, these titles get longer and longer. Mr. Gibbs, would you like to give us an overview before we put the motions on the table?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Both of the amended bylaws you have in front of you today are a mix of housekeeping amendments, including some increase in fines as a result of Bill 35, where they increased the MTI amount from 1,000 to a maximum of 3,000 per offense. So this bylaw amendment of the municipal ticketing information bylaw, again, nice mouthful for you. That bylaw, we did also eliminate the a significant number of the traffic and highway offenses under that bylaw, as we predominantly use the bylaw offense notice bylaw, also known as the adjudication bylaw, for parking infractions, because that has the ability to then leave the tickets in the vehicle, whereas municipal ticket we have to physically serve to an individual. So general housekeeping amendments, and then the increases of some of the fines up to those 3,000, as well as creating that escalation of fines going from first offense at 1,000, second offense at 2,000, and third and subsequent offenses at 3,000. There were some additional offenses created under the bylaw offense notice bylaw, as well as the municipal ticket information bylaw, as a result of the new zoning bylaw that council recently adopted.
Right, okay.
Say bylaw.
Let's get 5 more in there.
Council Palmer, do you have a question or you want to put the motion on the table?
Yeah, I move that the municipal ticket information amendment bylaw number 2408 be read first and second time.
Seconded for that motion, please, Councillor Devlin. Discussion on the motion. Council Palmer, you have a question, and Councillor Lucio.
I'll let Councillor Lucio go first.
Councillor Lucio.
Thank you, Marcels. Just a question through to staff. With the raising of fines, how were they decided? My question comes under the municipal property tree bylaw, number 1792. Why is the removal of a municipal tree $2,000 when, in my opinion, it should be $3,000?
That is a very valid point. We did take a look at some of the offenses, and again, this is where, so under the removal of municipal trees, depending on the severity of it, it's likely that we would be going through long form information instead, which has a minimum fine amount. I believe it starts at $3,000 under that bylaw, and it can go up to a maximum. I don't believe we've updated it, so I believe it's still at the 10,000, but when we do update it, it would be a maximum of 50,000 per offense. So it is, again, just one of those additional tools. We would likely start with a bond, depending on the severity of it, how many trees are removed. And then, so say somebody takes a small tree versus a large tree, that just kind of gives us the different ability to go different levels of enforcement. Okay.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah, just a general, similar to Councillor Lucio's on the merits of the actual fines. I don't think we want to get bogged down into debating each one at this point here. I would concur with Councillor Lucio that some, for example, the trees or vandalism are under a bit on the light side. And then I think staff have gone with the current philosophy of council. I'm not sure that I would agree entirely, but with the short-term rentals, pretty hefty fines. And those are, I think, daily fines, so they seem a little on the heavy-handed. However, I'll support the amendment bylaw, and if we need to tweak that kind of stuff, that might be something for another time.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Stickers?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I'm just a question to Mr. Gibbs is regarding these bylaws and the changes. It would have been really nice to have the track changes in front of us so we can see the difference in the fees and penalties. And then my other question to you is in regards to the business licensing bylaws. Have you vetted this through external stakeholders such as the Chamber of Commerce?
Through your worship, We have not vetted it through the chamber. I was just discussing this with their executive director right before this as well. The enforcement portion, it's a reflection of the needs of the bylaw department at this point to actually gain compliance on some of these. There is again, we kind of use them as an escalation tool. So council is aware, typically we start with the enforcement under the bond bylaw. It is a lower amount set as Council Palmer indicated, it is a daily offense, so each day is a new offense occurring. So we start under the bond bylaw and then escalate up to the municipal ticketing information bylaw, and then finally over to the long form information. It is something going forward, we will be in more regular communication with the chamber on this as well. But at this point, if council would like it, we could get you a good track changes copy as well.
That'd be great. Maybe just a follow-up question in regards to this process that you're describing. Is this process written out anywhere for people to follow along to ensure that there's, fairness and equity across the board, or is it just kind of, an ad hoc approach that's being undertaken in regards to certain infractions and how we're enforcing them, and whether we're going to, these friendly warnings or a ticketing process? Can you describe that for me a little bit?
Your worship, yes. It is partially written out, so it was partially contained within the previous B2 policy that was recently rescinded, so which is now an internal policy, operational policy on how to standard operational procedure when it comes to it. However, most offenses are determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the severity of the offense. What works for one situation may not work for another, so it is weighed out on a professional discretion of the bylaw officers as well as myself and our director, depending on the severity of the situation. So on these larger scale offenses, typically it is something that is discussed amongst the bylaw department at our regular meetings to determine what the appropriate means to gain compliance is. Our standard approach is the education first on the larger offenses, and then escalating again from bonds to MTIs to long form, depending on the needs of the specific offense and situation.
Okay. I don't think we're not this time. Thank you for that.
Mr. Sumner.
Your Worship, if I can just add on to that, as Mr. Gibson really succinctly summarized it there. Bylaw officers need many tools in the tool belt. They do a very, very challenging job. They are certified individuals, they are trained, they are professional, and it's very important that we give them as many tools as possible and understand that operationally they are going to have situations that require discretion. They need as many tools as possible when they deal with individuals that are non-compliant. This gives them one more tool in the tool belt, aligning with recent changes to provincial legislation as well. It doesn't mean that an individual who doesn't understand that they need a business license to operate is automatically slapped with a $3,000 fine. It means that they have the tool to go up to that if they need to. And again, as Mr. Gibson indicated, voluntary compliance is always our first approach, but they do need as many tools in the tool belt. And I think it's very important that we do rely on their professionalism as part of this and their operational day-to-day duties.
Thank you for that comment, and definitely education has been the key, and Mr. Gibbs has asked us to do is to announce that people need to pay these bills, and I hope that's been working, and I know our executive director of the chamber has been rounding up her crew to make sure they've paid, and I had to look on my wall to make sure I paid. And anyway, thank you for that. So any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Orlando, Councillor Jerry.
Yeah, just a comment. I'm not able to find the original one. I agree that having track changes version would make it easier. So just, those are by way of general comments. And secondly, just through the chair, a question for staff following on the discussion. If council members would like to make a change to like an amount for a specific fine or make adjustments or something like that, how is now the time to do it, I'm assuming, or what would staff recommend on those concerns?
Absolutely, Your Worship. So if council has specific areas of enforcement they would like us to focus on, where they feel they're a little bit light, or others that they feel a little bit on the heavier handed side, you are more than welcome to raise that staff at this point. One thing I would err on the side of caution is that being the amounts were determined typically based on industry standard across numerous municipalities, and as well as then comparing it with the needs of our community, the challenges that our bylaw enforcement officers do face when they are going through these active enforcements. So just keeping that in mind, but absolutely, if there are specific areas that you'd like to see a stronger hand or a lighter hand, staff are open to hearing that.
Councillor Cherry.
I rescind my comments.
All right. I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item number 2. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Cherry.
I move that municipal ticket information amendment bylaw number 2408 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Devlin. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Cherry, Councillor Stevens.
Just excited and happy to move this forward to give bylaw all the tools they need to make sure people come into compliance. This is something that's, been something we talked about for about the last 2 years and issues that community members have raised for about the last 10.
Great.
So, thanks.
Councillor Stiffeners?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I share Councillor Cherry's enthusiasm to see this bill pushed through, given the fact that we previously heard that the council chamber hasn't been informed, and as well as maybe other stakeholders throughout our community. And I'm just wondering if there's any appetite from the balance of council to make a motion to defer this so that we can have a more robust engagement with the community members.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Mayor Souls, I'll make a comment regarding Councillor Stiffeners' requests, and I'm sort of sensing it from some other council on some of the specifics. But before I do that, I'm supportive of the first and second reading, and I'd probably be supportive of the third reading and even adoption. Because of the importance with the changes that we made with the zoning. So it was in a kind of in a small area, but there was heads up of things that implications of the new zoning bylaw. So we do need to get the bylaw done at some point. I do have a question and maybe a resolve to this. So I'm understanding that the intent, if this goes through first and second reading, then there'd be, have we done the first and second already? Yeah, so if we go through the third reading, then it would be coming back for adoption at the next regular meeting, is my understanding.
That's correct.
And then in the event we don't pass the third reading at this time, could third reading and adoption happen at the next meeting?
Ms. Floyd, comment, no.
No, you need 24 clarifiers.
Right. And if we do third reading, and then we change our mind, then we would have to rescind third reading, make the tweak. So, yeah. I'll be supportive of the third reading. However, if there was a deferral of the third reading to the next meeting, I don't think that would be the end of the world. It's a couple more weeks to getting it done, unless we have a special meeting at a committee of the whole or something. So that's a potential solution to get that additional information that maybe some councilors need.
Okay, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing I would like to emphasize to council again, adoption, third reading is at your discretion. In full transparency, until this bylaw amendments, have been adopted, bylaw staff are unable to enforce under the zoning bylaw, under our current zoning bylaw.
Thank you for that comment. Appreciate that. So hearing that, Councillor Stiffeners, you'd ask for a motion to defer. Do you want to put that formal motion on and see if you get it seconded? Or are you okay leaving it?
No, I think given Mr. Gibbs's last statement in regards to the current zoning bylaw, I think I'll refrain from making that motion to defer at this time.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table. Am I correct with that?
Yes.
For reading the third time, thank you. Any other comments on the third time, Councillor Alano?
Yeah, Your Worship. I'd just like to thank staff for bringing this forward. In previous reports to Council on, improvements to our bylaw enforcement system. You know, I've been really impressed with what you've done and some of the progress on things that were a priority for me at least, and for council as well. You know, it is a concern regarding the lapse in time to when the bylaw will be enacted. But as a thought, we are going to have to come back for final adoption, and a deferral. Is there anything preventing us from doing third reading and final adoption at a subsequent meeting? We need to wait between the two. Yeah, I have to wait between the two. I would, just for exploratory purposes, want to put a motion to defer out, just so that some of the concerns and issues that council members have raised, they have an opportunity to network or discuss or suggest.
All right, so the motion, there is a motion to defer. Someone want to second that motion?
Is it a debatable motion?
No.
I'll second the motion for the vote.
Okay, so then we vote on it? Or it automatically gets deferred?
You need to vote on it.
All right, all those in favor? Opposed?
The
Okay.
original motion back.
Okay, we're going back to the original motion so for you, Ms. Delasal, that motion was not moved forward. And the original motion on the third reading is, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councilor Orlando is opposed, balance of council is in favor, that motion passes. Going on to item number 3. Someone want to make that motion for me, Councilor Lusal?
I move that bylaw offense notice amendment bylaw number 2409 be read a first and second time.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Councilor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on to item number 4. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Cherry?
Move that bylaw offense notice amendment bylaw number 2409 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Devlin. Discussion on this motion. Councilor Palmer.
Just briefly, a lot of the similar debate could be on this. One thing I noticed is there's a very small limit on the the $500 limit, so it's pretty limiting anyway. Actual dollar figures, but I think it all is pretty good. Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Going to take a 2-minute break right now because apparently jerseys have arrived and we would like to don those for the balance of the meeting.
Jerseys?
Oh,
I
man.
think, it's up there. Nobody will know the difference.
get like half a meeting.
Guys, it's still
worked at mode.
Okay, we're unmuted.
All right, so message to Duncan, who's the CAO in Grand Forks, my good friend. Congratulations. We got our butts kicked. We lost all 4 straight games. None of them were really even close. So we eat humble pie gracefully and with respect. However, we have had a dynasty for 5 years. So you won 1 championship. We've won 3 plus 4 if you go before COVID. So in 2025, I kneel to you, but over the last 5 years, you got a long ways to go. That's all I got to say.
All right, well, Everett, congratulations to you, your city, the team. So I would like to return this, probably the next service you're having. I can come down and I'll bring my Grizzlies. You can wear that. I'll wear this. We'll see how we can get things done. Thanks for the challenge. Appreciate it. And congratulations to the Border Bruins. And thank you again to the Grizzlies for what they've done for our community. All the best. Thanks.
Good luck in the provincial championships too.
All right, we are going to move on to wastewater treatment plant phase 1 upgrade loan authorization bylaw 2411. This comes to you, Ms. Floyd.
Thank you, Mayor Sauls. Last meeting, I believe council gave this bylaw the first 2 readings. Right now, we need approval to go through the alternate approval process rather than a referendum. So basically, what's in front of you now is just looking for authorization to proceed with that. If it's approved, we will get ads in the paper and we will start the process right away.
Good. Appreciate that. So I want to put this motion on the table for me. Councilor Devlin.
Whereas the Council of the City of Revelstoke has given 3 readings to wastewater treatment facility upgrade phase 1 loan authorization bylaw number 2411, which proposes an upgrade to the wastewater treatment facility and a debenture not to exceed $7 million to be obtained to finance constructions of the wastewater treatment plant facility upgrade phase 1, which will be repaid over a period not to exceed 25 years. And whereas the Council of the City of Revelstoke cannot adopt number 2411 until the approval of the electors has been obtained. Therefore, be it resolved that the corporate officer undertake an alternative approval process to determine the opinion of the electors with regard to the matter, and that council hereby establishes the elector response form to allow for multiple elector responses, that a deadline for receiving elector responses for submissions to the corporate officer is to be 4:30 p.m. Monday, June 10th, 2025, and that the determination of the total number of electors of the current area of the City of Revelstoke to which the approval process applies is 6,152.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Stapleton.
Can I have that read back to me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, sure. Whereas, as per the package.
Any further comments on the motion? Councilor Lano.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Sauls. Yeah, I'm happy to move forward with this. I'm happy with the borrowing for the wastewater treatment plant. I'm happy to use the alternative approval process for this. I think it's what it is designed for. I do have a specific detail question. It was mentioned by staff that there would be a newspaper advertisement. I would encourage that we also advertise it through our newsletter, our email newsletter, just because, and this is not really directed towards this one, but this is just for community members who sign up for that and have an opportunity to see what's going on. So just a quick question, is that something that is currently planned right now? Okay, great.
It is correct, Councilor Orlando. We also plan to put the information on the website.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. That'd be great. And just one last thing. I don't think there will be significant opposition to this. I could be wrong, but I really don't think so. So, and if anyone is thinking of that, feel free to come talk to me and I'll try and convince you why it's a good idea. So,
Awesome. All right. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Floyd, and thank you, Mr. Black, for all your work. Appreciate that. Moving on to Finance 9C. tax rate bylaw 2415. Someone put the motion on the table for me, please. Councillor Devlin,
I will move that the 2025 City of Revelstoke tax rates bylaw number 2415 be read a first, second, and third time.
seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Cherry. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Weatherall is here if you need to ask questions. Seeing no questions, no comment, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? You're in favor or opposed, Councillor? Opposed? Okay, note Councillor Orlando is opposed, balance of council is in favor. This tax rate bylaw has been passed. Moving on to 11A, staff reports, pardon me.
So I believe it was just read a first, second, and third time, not adopted.
Yeah, I said this motion was passed. Not adopted.
Oh, okay, got you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Moving on to staff reports, 11A, food commons lease. Ms. Floyd, comment.
Thank you, Mayor Sauls. So this is in follow-up to the delegation that you got at the Committee of the Whole meeting where TL came and presented the plan moving forward for the Food Commons project. I will note that there is a typo in number 1 of the recommendation. It should read ending April 30th, 2035, but it's using our standard lease agreement. It's been vetted through our legal, through the LFI's legal, and through Ms. Donato. We've been working with them. And we'd just like to move forward so that they can get started on the project.
All right, thank you. Councilor Lucas, you want to put that motion on the table?
Sure. I move that council give notice of their intention to dispose of an interest in land and associated buildings by way of a lease of property located at 1495A and 1800 Powerhouse Road, legally described as Parcel B of the southeast quarter of Section 26, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian Community District, except part including in Plan 10185 to the Revelstoke Local Food Initiative Society and the Indigenous Friendship Society of Revelstoke for a 10-year term commencing May 1st, 2025 and ending April 30th, 2035, 2 additional options with annual rent of $10 per year.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Devlin. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, Mayor Sauls. It's great to see that this is come to fruition, so they can start with their garden plan down there. Just a question when it comes to associated buildings. Are there any buildings on the land that we are leasing to?
There are currently no buildings on that portion of the land.
Okay, I just want to make sure they weren't absorbing the old Boston Park.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item number 2. Councillor Lucas.
I move that the proposed lease for the Revelstoke Local Food Initiative Society and the Indigenous Friendship Society of Revelstoke be approved for execution upon fulfilling the legislative requirements for disposition of property.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Cherry. Further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Item number 3, Councillor Lucas.
I move that the corporate officer and director of Parks, Recs, and Culture be authorized to sign a lease agreement for the Revelstoke Local Food Initiative Society and the Indigenous Friendship Society of Revelstoke for a 10-year term commencing May 1st, 2025 and ending April 30th, 2035.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Devlin. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you all for your work on this. Thank you, Ms. Donato, Ms. Floyd. Appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to this moving forward with the Food Commons people. All right, moving on to item 11B, short-term rental goal setting. Mr. Simon, do you have an overview for us?
Through your worship, council staff do have a presentation if you would like to see it. If not, I can give a high level overview.
Council?
Like to see it.
Okay, can you do the presentation, please?
Thank you, your worship. So today we are going to be discussing establishing kind of a general high level overall project goal for the short-term rental over regulatory review. So I'll start off with a little bit of background. I'll whiz through that quickly because you guys have heard it a few times, move into discussion, and then conclude with the options for council. So April 2022, going all the way back a few years now, is when the city adopted bylaws to amend its previous short-term rental regulations, provided some clarity for short-term rental uses in the bylaw, got consistency. We had, half a dozen, 8 or so different names related to short-term rental in the bylaw, so cleaned all that up. Expanded whole home short-term rental allowances in the downtown and Victoria Road corridor area. And then we also established a local principal residence rule for select areas in the community, one of them being the downtown fringe, so the C2, which has recently been changed to the MU2 zone adjacent to downtown, as well as 59 properties adjacent to Hay Road in the Yarrow Heights neighborhood. These changes built upon historic approvals for spot zone properties, as well as comprehensive development zones that have historically allowed for short-term rental in the community. So what's changed? October 2023, the province passes Bill 35, which is the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act. Some of the high-level changes for council to be aware of: increased fines, the ability under a municipal ticket information bylaw to go from a maximum of $1,000 per offense per day to $3,000 per offense per day, require short-term rentals register with a new provincial platform. This data is shared with the municipality, and there is a process by which we can request properties be delisted. This is underway, and staff currently do work regularly with the province to delist properties that do not hold a valid business license. This legislation removed legal protections for non-conforming short-term rentals in a community. So, i.e. those properties that are grandfathered, you were allowed to do short-term rental, the city changes the rules, you're no longer allowed to. Historically, you would have been grandfathered. You can continue on as a legal non-conforming use. That is no longer the case. The city goes and opens up the books and changes zoning regulations now to say you were once able to do a short-term rental, now you're not able to. Those properties are not protected as a grandfather property, and they would be required to come into compliance with the city's new rules. And lastly, there is a principal residence requirement where if you want to operate a short-term rental in the province, it needs to be out of your principal residence, the place where you spend the majority of time in a given year. This is not applicable for Revelstoke unless the Revelstoke City Council decides to opt into this requirement. So we presented a potential work plan in October 2024 to you guys. You may recall we originally had conversations back in January 2024. Staff workload was quite high at the time. We didn't have capacity nor budget to take on a full regulatory review of our existing short-term rental framework in light of the changes under the provincial legislation a few months before that. Council ultimately said, okay, let's defer discussion on this until the fall. We came back in the fall and said, okay, if we're going to do this, here's how we could do it in 2025. Council said, looks good, get on with it. We did preliminary in-house research between October and January 2025. The reason why there wasn't more being done during this time is we were wrapping up the zoning bylaw, so we didn't want to have so many overlapping projects going on at the same time. So high-level review done internally by staff. You can see some attachments in your package today showing the conclusion or the summation of that internal review. We looked at the other 13 resort municipalities, did a bit of a comparative analysis, showing you guys who's opted in, who hasn't opted in to the new principal residence requirement, as well as their existing regulatory regimes. We did public engagement through February and March 2025. So an initial information session back on February 26th, followed by a survey that was available for 5 weeks. And now we are at this critical stage with this red X, and we are on track right now for our timeline, which is great to see. But this is kind of a key pivotal moment. You may recall, seems like yesterday, but October was some time ago now when we were presenting the original work plan to you. April 2025 was always identified as this key pivotal moment where we've started the project and we have to get this overall goal established, so that staff have direction to go craft some different policy scenarios to say, here's a few different ways that we can achieve that goal, and we can analyze what the economic implications are, the implications for housing would be, so that council and the community get the subjective data. So we need that to move into phase 2 of the project. We're wrapping up phase 1. Phase 2 is all about delving into the different policy scenarios, economic analysis, looking at what impacts we would have on this community depending on how we manage short-term rentals. So in order to help inform this goal and to give council feedback on the pulse of the community, we did a survey over 5 weeks. We received 517 responses. You'll see the full data is included in your guys' package as an attachment today. Just a high-level overview. About 86% of the respondents were year-round permanent residents in Revelstoke, which was excellent to see. 71% of the respondents don't operate any form of short-term rental, bed and breakfast, tourist accommodation, and importantly, they don't work in an industry that's related to it. So that could be, a furniture company, it could be a hot tub cleaning business. They don't work in any related industry. 72% of respondents agree with a goal that allows residential property owners to participate in the tourism economy. Of that 72%, 24% are made up of individuals that think you should be allowed to operate your property the way you wish, regardless of whether or not you live in Revelstoke. And 48% believe that only locals should be able to participate in the tourism economy. And then we had 18% of respondents indicating that residential property owners shouldn't be allowed to participate in the tourism economy, and that we need to take more drastic action to try and convert existing short-term rental to long-term rental. So, moving forward based on that information, staff are needing direction from council to establish an overall goal that we can then go refine some different policy scenarios, i.e., here's how we would amend our zoning bylaw, business licensing bylaw to achieve that goal. Here's the impacts of that. And keep in mind, we've presented 3 options for you guys. If you guys don't like any of them, there's a 4th option for you guys to direct us to go back and do some more work or come up with a goal right now that you would like us to pursue. Going through the 3 that we have presented, option 1, that would be establishing a goal that promotes long-term rental in the community and attempts to transition existing short-term rental to long-term rental. That's an ambitious goal. And happy to take any questions right now if there's.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Simon. In regards to option 1 here, what's the financial implications of opting in? I believe the city has made some allocations of funding from OAP to our community housing provider. So what would be the implication of opting into that? And then the other question that I have in regards to this is when we look at other communities such as Montreal or Tofino or Kelowna, when we look at the conversion rate of STRs to long-term housing, what's been the success rate of that overall?
Good.
Through your worship, excellent questions. With respect to the economic implications specifically, wouldn't have numbers on hand to give you. The whole idea here is once council endorses a goal, then we can come up with different policy scenarios. So let's say council endorses this goal.
Mm-hmm.
We would then develop policy scenarios, say, okay, the city's opting into the provincial principal residency requirement. We are amending our zoning bylaw to be even more restrictive, rescinding historic approvals. What does that look like in terms of MRDT taxes that are generated, OAP funding, business license revenue? So that primary impact. What are the secondary impacts for businesses? What are the tertiary impacts for employment that's dependent on short-term rental? Really unpacking all of that. And so we would have a few different policy scenarios with the implications outlined under each for council and the community to review and consider. But this would be the more restrictive option, most certainly. And, I can tell you, I think right now we're sitting, Mr. Gibbs can correct me if I'm wrong, I think probably around $250,000 to $300,000 a year in business license revenue, a large bulk of that coming from short-term rentals. That's one example. And with respect to other municipalities answering the second piece, conversion rates, I've heard anecdotal information, well, loosely anecdotal information, anywhere 3% to 25%.
Councilor.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just to the chair, since I got, it's open. Mr. Simon, can you tell us about what happened to Tofino when they opted in? If you have any data on that. I know they recently chose to opt back out this year. It was a close vote, but through community support and they changed their mind quite quickly after 1 year.
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, I wouldn't have any more insight than what's been provided. I've read newspaper articles about it and looked at their website. As part of our background research, we did reach out to all resort municipalities. I know the District of Tofino is going through some staffing changes right now, so they've been a little bit hectic, I think, and are quite bogged down. We were able to contact and have individual meetings with, I think, 9 or 10 of the resort municipalities. There's a few of them. Osoyoos was another one where they're in the process of their planning department. They had opted into the principal residence requirement. Their planning department is being migrated to the regional district out there. So they're kind of in this state of transition. So they weren't available to meet with us either. With respect to Tofino, you're correct. They did opt into the principal residence requirement. I'm not sure if there was a full, complete understanding of how the new legislation related to their existing zoning and the changes that would need to be made to get them consistent. And I understand that it caused confusion for some members of that community. And that's part of the reason why I think they want to go back to kind of a local made in Tofino solution now with some future zoning amendments. But we could try and get them on the horn to have a little bit more of a concrete conversation, but at this time, not much more than what's been published.
Perfect. I guess I'll follow up, but I mean, you pretty much answered yourself. Tofino basically saw it as a failure and went back to their local options, which were pretty robust to begin with. And I just want to make sure that this council table understands that. I'd happily have a conversation, or if you could present to us, if you get time and actually chat with them to get some information, I'd love to see it. I think this would be beneficial for everybody at this table, but yeah.
Councilor Stephen.
Yes, going back to the conversion rate of STRs, given the current housing needs assessments for Revelstoke, with the amount of projects that we have coming down the pipeline, if we had a 3 to 5% conversion rate of STRs, what kind of an impact would that have, or what kind of a positive impact would that have on our current housing needs?
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst, any conversion of short-term rental, long-term rental is going to be positive for this community, most certainly, from a housing perspective for long-term residents, when you're looking at it solely through that lens. Not talking about the economics associated with it or the positive spin-offs that come from keeping tourism dollars within the community. From a pure housing perspective to house long-term residents, anytime one individual gets into long-term housing in the community, in my mind, is a success, most certainly. The impact with respect to our overall housing needs in this community, it will be a small piece of the pie. We can delve into the numbers, and that's what part of this analysis would be looking at doing, is how much of a piece of that pie would the conversion potentially eat up. My professional recommendation, and when we're looking at solving the housing crisis, is most certainly managing short-term rentals efficiently is one tool in the toolbox. But we need to be implementing every single tool in the toolbox. You know, this council just adopted a new zoning bylaw. I would argue the density allowances in that zoning bylaw will do more to improve long-term housing supply in this community than restricting every single short-term rental in the community.
Follow up, Councillor Stapenhurst, then Councillor Rolando.
Trying to think of how to phrase this next. Well, potentially, so if we looked at option one as opting in, what would we still have the same needs and assessments, or will we still have the same demand for housing, given the impact that this could potentially have on the overall tourism industry?
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst, hard to say. It would impact our projections for how much housing we need. Might impact it by less than 5%. It might impact it by 10%. We'd have to delve into those numbers. Essentially, if council endorsed this goal, you would see us come back and say, okay, here's 3 different ways we can amend the regulatory regime, the policies, the zoning rules, everything related to short-term rental in this community to achieve that goal. Option 1 would be opting into the principal residence requirement, establishing more strict zoning regulations, rescinding historic approvals in X, Y, and Z way. Option 2, under this goal, opting into the principal residence requirement, maybe some different ways that we're rescinding historic zoning approvals, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see this would be a very restrictive option that you'd be giving direction to staff, because our goal would be we only want to allow for long-term rental in this community where we have that option to say one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rolando.
Your worship, I just need to step out in the hallway for about 5 seconds. I'm just letting.
Anyone else want to make comment? I'm quite prepared to move forward here. Councillor Palmer.
So we've had quite a bit of dialogue on option 1, or we're going through option 2 and 3 subsequently. Yeah, so just in general, I would not be supporting option 1 for a variety of reasons.
Option 2, Mr. Simon.
So to council, option 2, essentially the overall goal would be to allow permanent residents in Revelstoke to participate in the tourism economy. Now, again, keep in mind, this is a broad goal. You're gonna have different policy scenarios that would be developed to achieve this goal. So this approach would still allow for short-term rental, but it would focus on how to restrict it for principal residents in Revelstoke. Scenarios would include opting into the province's provincial residence requirement, as well as a made-in Revelstoke principal residence requirement that builds off the work that we've done. This option would still include scenarios to rescind some historic approvals, but not as drastic as option 1. And it would likely seek to explore how the regulatory framework can really be simplified. Right now, depending on what your zoning is, we have, if you really boil it down technically, probably about 10 different sets of short-term rental rules, depending on what your zoning is. We would really want to clean that up as part of this process. But under this option, you could think we might have one policy scenario where it's okay, we opt into the principal residence requirement and amend our zoning rules to be comparable to what the provinces are. What does that look like? Another option would be, okay, let's not opt into the province's principal residence requirement. Let's keep some of the historic approvals that we've already granted. And let's look at maybe expanding through a made-in Revelstoke solution. And then another option might be even a little bit more lenient than that. So you can see how you get a little bit more variability under this goal, where we'd still be looking and giving you guys an overview of opting into the principal residence requirement at the province and what that would look like. But we'd also be exploring more local made-in Revelstoke solutions as part of this that I think would be more of a balance to account for those historic approvals that have been granted. You can think of this one as kind of a middle of the road approach. First one is overly restrictive. This one's kind of a middle of the road. And then the third one is looking at being a little bit more lenient.
Any comments on option 2? Let's go to option 3, please.
So option 3 would be allowing flexibility for all residential property owners to participate in the tourism economy. So again, the most flexible option with the least restrictions. We wouldn't be focusing on principal residence requirements, whether they be provincial or local. Under this option, we probably wouldn't even include a policy scenario that includes opting into the provincial principal residence requirement. So we wouldn't even analyze what the economic implications are. And there would be no impact on any development rights within the community related to short-term rental allowances. So again, going back to the earlier parts of the presentation, and I've been harping on this in the community for a little bit, the change that the province made with respect to grandfathered rights for short-term rentals, it's huge. It's monumental. As a planner, we don't see this too often. And so this option would be saying, we're not going to utilize that piece of the legislation in any way, shape, or form. Option 2, yeah, we're going to dabble with it, look at it, see what the impacts would be. Option 1, we're going to go pretty far down that road of looking at our historic approvals and taking advantage of that new piece of legislation.
Okay. Councillor Stiglers.
Yes, thank you through the chair to Director Simon. Would option 4 be possible to kind of commingle option 3 and option 2? Because I feel to a certain degree we're almost being forced to make a decision here with kind of limited information. I think to a certain degree, I think the province might even be walking back some of their short-term rentals based on an article that came out just the other day. And then the other thing to factor into all of this, which I don't think any of us saw coming, is this really kind of strong anti-sentiment towards traveling down south at this current moment. And is that going to increase the amount of domestic tourism, and potentially, supporting our decision if we opted to go with either option 3 or option 2 and increase the tourism? I think we have, basically three kind of pillars of our economy here in Revelstoke, CPKC, the mill, and tourism. So how do we kind of support those? And I think option 3 is really attractive to me in the sense that we're giving the people that may be impacted by the tariffs an opportunity to supplement their income. So maybe, I'm not sure if there's a question there. Yeah. So I guess my question in there would be, is there a possibility of looking at option 3 and option 2, or like maybe what's the capacity of the development services to generate a report that kind of has a more wholesome look at maybe 2 of the three options?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, Councillor Stapeners, in my opinion, I think that option 2 could include a policy scenario. So maybe instead of doing 3 policy scenarios, we would do 4 policy scenarios. And again, really thinking of this, we're at that high level right now. We're establishing goals: overly restrictive, middle of the road, least restrictive. And we're gonna go through the same thing once you guys establish a goal and we go back, do some policy scenarios, work with our consultant on what the impacts of each of those scenarios would be. And you might come back and say, you know what, you're delving into the details now, you're giving us some numbers. You presented 3 policy options. They're still not lenient the way that we want them to be, or we want to see these tweaks and changes. The idea is that we have an economic model built. Okay, let's go tweak the policy framework. It changes the numbers in this way, plug it into the model. Here's the objective implications associated with it. So completely hear and respect what you're saying. I think that either option 2 or option 3 would give us the ability to have that flexibility. And when we come back with these policy scenarios, that's when we can really delve into it, because you guys will see, you know, under each scenario, amend section XYZ of zoning bylaw to do this, amend section blank of zoning bylaw to do this. We can really delve into the meat of it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Councilor Chair.
Thanks, Marcellus. Just at the council table, I think there's a really good middle ground between option 2 and 3 that can both increase our long-term housing stock, as well as allow for both flexibility for property owners to participate in the tourism market. I'm going to say it right now, I'm not a fan of opting in to the provincial legislation. I think that more of a made in Revelstoke feel is policy is the way to go. And I think Tofino and Euclid have shown that. So I just wanted to put that out here. Happy to jump into different policies that could allow that. But again, we're just looking at it high level right now. So I don't think it's the appropriate time.
Okay, Councilor Lucille and Councilor Paul.
Thank you, Marshals. I'd have to agree with Councilor Cherry. I think a made in Revelstoke solution is the best way to go. Question through to staff. If we were to opt in, what percentage of our STRs would be affected by that decision?
Your worship, Councilor Lucio. It would be a very large percentage. I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head. I believe we have 624 roughly properties that are eligible to be used as short-term rental, with 101 of those being restricted to principal residents. So you'd be at, you know, about 523 minus, you know, say 250 units that are currently at the resort. So you'd probably have about 250 units that would be impacted if we opted into the principal residence requirement, because do remember that the resort, regardless of whether this council opts in or does not opt into the principal residence requirement, they, under their master development agreement for the resort lands, are still entitled to short-term rental under their agreement with the province. So they're exempt from that principal residence requirement.
Thanks.
Sorry,
just one more. When it comes to on-site operator requirements like we have at Stoke Living, would that be something that we can work into our STR requirements moving forward? So that would allow people to be a part of the short-term rental, but still requiring there to be an on-site operator.
Through your worship to Councilor Lucio, just to clarify, so Stoke Living, they're not permitted B&Bs or short-term rental right now, but we do have 59 properties adjacent to Hay Road where they have that permanent resident on-site operator. So you'd be living in your suite, renting out above. Your suite is your primary residence, or you're living above, renting out your suite. Most certainly with options 2 and 3 that we've presented to you today, we would be examining what that looks like and coming up with some granular level details as to how that impacts different areas, different zones in the community, and then giving you guys the big picture of what does this look like. We got, 3,300 dwelling units in the city. How many would now be eligible for short-term rental?
And sorry, one last follow-up. Would that be able to be expanded so that wouldn't necessarily be on site, but within the community to respond to complaints, bylaw infractions, stuff like that within a timely fashion to kind of make it more focused on the local Revelstoke community more so than outside investors?
Through Councilor Lucio, right now, when you have to have 24/7 property management services, we still do require that to be a local 24/7 property management service. So it could be an individual living in town that is taking responsibility, or it could be a local company that does it. If we do that, then what essentially that option would be looking at is allowing for whole home rentals, as long as they have property management services that are locally based. And staff can certainly look at that option. That's getting us closer to option 3. you know, a really good way to think about short-term rental. I know our current framework doesn't really provide for this, but it's almost a few different levels is the way that I see it. The first level is, okay, you can do a short-term rental, but it has to be your principal residence. You got to be residing on site. So kind of like a modern breakfast. Option 2 is you can do a short-term rental, 24/7 property management services. You don't need to be there. And then option 3 is when you start getting into higher level, more commercial type operations, classic hotels, motels, etc., things of that nature. So if we can get our framework to be boiled down to be that simple, I think that would be a big benefit for this community. And then the key is, what are the particulars of the rules for each of those categories, and where do we allow those uses?
And sorry, one last question. When it comes to the resort lands and their entitlements with STR, is there abilities for surrounding lands to be absorbed into that agreement?
Through your worship to Councillor Lucio, that would be a process, most certainly. I wouldn't say no. There would be a lot of items that have to fall into place. The province would have to be open to amending the master development agreement. I would imagine that there has to be some type of buy-in from the primary developer at the resort to do that if someone wanted to come into it. And the process that would go through, we'd have to understand a little bit better from the Mountain Resort branch in terms of public engagement, because you would essentially be increasing the bed units that are being constructed at the resort or reallocating the existing number of bed units that are there. So in theory, yes, it could be done. Practically, do I think it's likely? I would say it's unlikely to occur.
Thank you.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Interesting, Councillor Stapenhurst question about the blended option 2, 3, re-emphasized by Councillor Cherry. It's kind of where I was at when I was researching this as well, saying option 2 is too restrictive. Option 3 is too open. Some general comments on the opt-in. Likely to be opposed to any kind of opt-in scenarios for a variety of reasons. Briefly, one, government overreach and taking away rights of citizens. There's some fundamental democratic principles I totally disagree on that. Second point is, in this short-term crisis, when I say short-term, over many years, there's been this quick sway that short-term rentals have become a dirty word, essentially. And I think we're letting the pendulum swing a little bit too far. And then last, there's been a lot of headway that we've made as council on addressing short-term rentals, and more importantly, how do we facilitate allowing more long-term rental scenarios. And so we have a lot of inventory that's coming up very, very quickly in the next few years coming on the market. The market's going to self-regulate to a certain extent those issues. So the summary, though, is I'm leaning more to the option 3, but with more restrictive language and using traditional tools to ensure that. So as an example, referring back to, I'm hesitant to go to the example, might be too controversial. There is tools that we can restrict the where short-term rentals are with existing tools in certain areas. And so that's where I'm more leaning, is using those. And that's that made in Revelstoke. This can be made in Revelstoke anyway, but the made in Revelstoke kind of idea is using traditional tools. And I think our new zoning bylaw, it has all those tools in there to allow that as we evolve. So those are my comments. The question that I have, Mayor Souls, is how soon, from a staff perspective, do we need to nail down this, this option, or it's kind of like a policy decision? And I know there was some directive from council on the timelines. if we pause, or like how much time, I guess, if staff could sort of generally answer as to what, because we don't seem to be in the same kind of crisis that we were a year or so ago.
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, Councillor Palmer, I would say council is completely in the driver's seat here. If council wants to take an extra couple of weeks to kind of digest this a little bit and maybe come up with some different options that you guys would like to put on the table, it won't have a huge impact. You can see here, I kind of pulled up, these are the key milestones kind of taken from the project management plan. So we are on track right now, so we're not behind. That's a good place to be starting. We'd be looking at doing the targeted stakeholder engagement and the scenario development, as well as economic analysis and housing analysis between May and July. If that goes May to August or even into the fall, I wouldn't say that it's going to be totally detrimental. I would like to keep this end goal in mind of being able to present this to council, at least for initial consideration this year. And you can see we're flexible the way that it was inputted there to accommodate any potential changes in the process. So October, November, December, so basically Q4 of 2025 is when we want to have a bylaw in front of council for initial consideration. That bylaw, we will have to double check and I'll have to work with Ms. Floyd, but because it is all encompassing and there's arguments as to, it is aligned with the OCP, but I think that we'll be able to hold a public hearing. The legislation, since that's changed, that's another can of worms we're going to have to go through. But again, initial consideration by the end of the year. So I wouldn't see it as detrimental to the timelines.
So, Mr. Simon, so if we put a motion on the table, let's say if I said, okay, I want to put a motion on the table for option 3, you would come back with some prescriptive things to move forward. That doesn't tie us into option 3 as it's written. It gives us a bit of flexibility. And the reason I'm asking that is some of us are going off to Silga next week, and we may want to ask some of our counterparts what they're doing, that sort of thing, and go from there. Now, some of you are grinning around the table. Obviously, there's something you got on your mind that you want to bring up. So I'm not bringing anything to the table at this point. I'm asking questions. So if you guys want to weigh in, now's the time. Councilor Palmer.
I don't, hopefully I was one of the ones for any of it.
That's me.
So Mayor Souls, I like your idea, like if there was a motion, something, that staff flesh out further option 3 with more restrictive language. I think that's not restricting us, but it gives us staff something to start working with.
Right.
So if there was a motion, something like that, I certainly would be supportive.
You want to make comment? Now's the time. Go ahead.
I'll let these guys go. I was doing this.
Councilor Alano, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions for clarification through the chair. The first one is in regards to the definition of permanent resident. Is staff working on a set definition? There's 2 primary definitions here. One is principal resident requirement, which is defined by the province's rules. What does the permanent resident, how are you defining that?
Mr. Simon.
Through worship, Councilor Orlando. So it's very similar. We currently have it defined within our zoning bylaw. It's again where you're spending the majority of your time, and the key distinction in ours is that you can only claim one principal residence, one area as your permanent residence.
Okay, so that would that leads to the second question. So if we were to adopt a version that would allow for permanent resident participation, that would be restrictive to your primary residence. So I could not own 4 or 5 rentals. Mm-hmm.
Through your worship, that is correct. And this is where, again, based on direction from council, based on what we're hearing in the community, everything is open to potentially be amended within our zoning bylaw as part of this project in order to achieve the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So I wouldn't put it off the table that, saying that we have a very rigid definition right now. If that definition needs to be beefed up or needs to be scaled back, then we are happy to work through that with council and the community.
Thank you. And to the chair, just one more question regarding historic approvals. Option number 2 mentions scenarios may include bylaw amendments to rescind certain historic approvals. What is this in reference to? Is this spot zoning or is this other zoning related things? What are we talking about?
Three words from Councilor Orlando. So it could be looking at the spot zones. It could be looking at some historic comprehensive development zones that were created that aren't getting built out currently, but are permitted to do short-term rentals. Again, this would be something that we would unpack with different policy scenarios. And what I'm hearing from council right now, this is excellent conversation. This is exactly the dialogue that we need to go craft. And if we end up doing 5 different policy scenarios for council and the community to consider, I don't see that as a big issue. It really shows that we're trying to figure out what policy option makes the most sense for Revelstoke. So what I'm hearing is council is kind of between option 2 and 3. And one suggestion I would have is, because we want to keep the goal nice and tight, high level. If council went with option 2 as an example, and then wanted to include and that in their resolution, staff develop a policy scenario that would still look at how we get locals to participate, but by providing some flexibility, then we can present that to you as a policy option that is kind of that between option 2 and 3, which is what I'm hearing. Because I can appreciate this is very high level and it's hard not to delve into the details, but it's when we do the policy scenario drafting, that's when we're really going to unpack so much of this. And when we bring it back to you, council says this is still too restrictive or this is not restrictive enough. That's really the time to start delving into it. So keep in mind, you can give us that direction without it being part of the formal goal, if that makes sense.
Okay. Councillor Devlin, Councillor Stapenhurst, and then I'll come back to Councillor Cherry.
Okay, just some comments here. Generally, my personal view on this project is not to, I mean, we've seen from the community via the survey that we did, which granted, I mean, 500 responses is pretty good for the city survey, I'd say. We've seen that there's not a lot of appetite to reduce or limit the amount of short-term rentals in town. There's a little bit, but not enough to make that the policy goal. So I think everybody, from what I've heard around the table, I could be wrong, but I think everybody, including myself, thinks option 1 is right off the table, I think, at this point. I don't think that's really what we've seen from the community's desire. My personal view in this is I would not necessarily want to see a massive increase in the number of short-term rentals we have in town. I would also not necessarily want to see a massive decrease. I mean, maybe I would personally, but the community doesn't, so that's where I have to put my vote. I would, however, be amenable to seeing less concentration in very specific areas and less concentration in very specific scenarios in which somebody can operate a short-term rental. Currently, how it works is you basically have to own a property in a very specific part of town. Most of those properties are a very specific development that are open to it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't give people that don't have that ability to buy in many options in terms of operating an STR. My view is that option 2 is a good middle ground. I don't particularly, I mean, I don't know because I don't know what policies option 3 would bring in, but I don't think I would be very in support of many of them by what I'm seeing, because I don't really think we need to open the door for investment properties more than we already have. I think there is a good opportunity here to make it more equitable for the citizens of Revelstoke without giving a lot of leeway to foreign or outside of Revelstoke investment. I think that would be where I would like to see the goal of this project be personally, but I'm happy to support something in the middle ground of 2 and 3, but I would personally like to see at least one of the policy scenarios kind of be more directed towards permanent residents in Revelstoke, if that's possible.
Councillor Stickners.
Yes, thank you. I think, hearing all the comments around the table, I think it's a great conversation that we're having. I think it's really, I think it's really reflective of what we're hearing throughout the community. And what I'm hearing from around the table is excuse me, how do we move forward and allow the residents to participate and benefit from the opportunities without being too restrictive, while at the same time not being overly liberal or allowing it to kind of expand out of control. So maybe my question to Director Simon through the chair is what's what would be your recommendation to have sort of policies in place that are, is it easier to dial things back, or is it easier to kind of?
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst. I think from planning department perspective, if we are talking expanding or significant modifications that could see expansions of short-term rental, even if there is a principal residence rule, it's, start low, go slow. You can build it up as you do go along. Once something is permitted, it's challenging to claw it back. So that would definitely be our approach. But I think the key here again is there will be various policy options under whatever goal council ultimately endorses where we can really delve into this. And as we move through this project, if council is not happy with any of those policy options, if the community comes back and says none of these hit the mark, we are happy to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate in a way that makes sense for this community.
Councillor Cherry.
Thanks, Mr. A couple questions, I guess a bit of a statement. Through the chair, Director Simon, can we use the provincial legislation in regards to the grandfathering clause without opting into the principal residency option?
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, yes, you can.
Amazing. Then what I'd be looking for is no provincial opt-in, and any expansion of STRs must include long-term housing on site as an option. And how we get there, we can flush out, but I just wanted to make sure that what I'm looking for is echoed here. You don't have to agree with me, but the options that we do choose, that's kind of where I'm going with it. So there's community benefit as well as personal benefit.
So elaborate on what you're talking about.
For example, we see in Tofino and Ucluelet, what they'll have is they'll allow a primary resident or an operator to live on site in either a suite or a carriage house while allowing for another unit to be on the same property to be used in the short-term market. I think they've had great success. It's not perfect, but I think we can learn a lot from that while we craft our own. I don't want to see full home STRs scattered around town with no community benefit outside of whoever bought it first at say $1 million, 1.2, where it's now allowed to be STR and the value is now at 1.5, 1.8, 2 mil. I don't see that being a community benefit.
Okay. So, thanks for that. So I'm going to go back. Councilor Palmer, do you want to weigh in before I make a statement?
No, I'll let you know.
Okay, so if we go with option 2, it's permanent residence. So what I'm hearing is local residents, right? Somebody living on the property and allowing them to do short-term rentals throughout the community doesn't achieve, or it might achieve. And then, so I guess my question, Mr. Simon, does that give you a basis to build something on? Now, I want to kind of look at the flexibility of all residential property owners, at least to some degree, because what happens if somebody moves to our community and now we'll say, okay, I'm comfortable, I want to do this business in our community, and but I'm not going to be here all of the time. I'll be here 6 months or whatever. And as long as there's some operator on that property, does that work? Or are we opening that up to too many investors?
To your worship, excellent question. As we get into the nitty-gritty specifics of the policies, that's something we can definitely examine. I know Rosalind had I don't think it was very formalized, but it was an informal policy that they ultimately walked back from that kind of said, you can rent out your house for 3 months out of the year if you're not there, right? And then it became really challenging to enforce in the logistics associated with tracking that. But even right now, permanent resident on-site operator could just be an on-site operator. It doesn't have to be a permanent resident, right? So we can look at different flexibility as we delve into those regulations. If council is looking for something kind of between option 2 and option 3, staff's recommendation would be probably to go with option 2, because that would be again, to Councillor Lucio's point, without going Councillor Stapenhurst's point, without going too far down the road, like how hard it is to scale things back. But if council wanted us to look at policy scenarios that do incorporate the flexibility that would come in option 3 on kind of the low end, that in the resolution, a policy scenario be developed to incorporate further flexibility to be examined by council at a later date. And then you might have 4 different scenarios, one on the very far end, opting into the principal residence requirement, which again, it might be worthwhile to understand the implications associated with that, just so that even if there's not huge, broad support across the table for it, just so that we are understanding what that would look like for this community. I think that's an important part of being transparent with the public, given the legislation that was passed. And then on the far end, a little bit more flexibility in how we go about this.
All right, so Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. So what, further to your comments earlier about somewhere between 2 and 3 and giving staff some direction, we were touting the possibility of option 3 that's less or more restrictive than an option 3. The flip side, and kind of what I'm feeling right now, is an option 2 that is less restrictive than the dialogue on here. So there's a potential motion on that. And everybody has slightly different nuances, right? So it's how do we get to that agreement? But so that staff prepare a less restrictive option 2 for this short-term rental project for council consideration is a possible. I could put that motion on now, or I don't know if we want to have more dialogue, but then that would give staff some direction based on this conversation.
Put it on there.
Okay, I'll put that motion.
Do you have another comment, Councilor Orlando or Councilor Devlin?
I was just gonna ask for a little clarification for Councilor Palmer. Which part of option 2 specifically do you think are too restrictive? Just because like I don't know what less restrictive.
Yeah, well, that's the nuances, like, so
Yeah.
because
I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm curious like what part of it.
yeah, so the one area that I stated, but that was just my lens, was the opt-in, the provincial
I
opt-in.
think it feels like we're all kind of on the same page with the
Yeah.
opting in.
And so it's really leaving it pretty vague for staff's, bit of interpretation or finding solutions based on the conversation that's been here.
Yeah, and so I don't think any of us want to opt in per se, but if we can have something that basically says, we've got local residents with the flexibility to allow for some other residential thing, as long as we've got people living on. Am I giving you too much leeway, or do you want me to nail it right down to say, hell no, you gotta live here, you gotta be a permanent resident, away we go?
That's where I would personally lean, but I'm willing to support. Go a little outside.
Yeah.
If I may, through your worship to council, with option 2, we'll have various policy scenarios, some of them being more restrictive, some of them being less restrictive. But what I'm hearing around the council table is that maybe you don't even want us examining a scenario where we opt into the principal residence rule from the province, and you just want us focusing on Revelstoke. So if you went with option 2 and you did an and that resolution, I said, and that staff do not prepare policy scenarios that include opting into the province's principal residence requirement, and they focus on all policy scenarios to be a made in Revelstoke solution. That would, I think, give us that direction. If you want to include some additional wording in this option to allow flexibility for permanent residents in Revelstoke to participate in the tourism economy, I don't know if that's getting us closer to where you guys want, and then further direction for crafting the policy scenarios. Our team will be very happy with that, because then we're bringing something back to you that is more in line with council's feeling today.
Okay, so there hasn't been a second yet, but my motion would be that staff prepare a less restrictive option 2 for the short-term rental project for council consideration that do not include provincial opt-in scenarios.
Okay, I'll second that motion. But you want something to add to that motion?
Maybe, if I can, to the chair, to Director Simon, can you repeat what you said about flexibility? I want to get that wording.
Through your worship, through your worship, Councilor Chair, the option could say to allow flexibility for permanent residents in Revelstoke to participate in the tourism economy. And if you want to go even further, you could say without opting into the provincial principal residence requirement.
I'm wondering if either of the mover or the seconder would be open to that amendment.
So Mayor Souls, I had some wording similar to that already. It's getting to be a pretty long motion, but that's okay. That staff prepare the less restrictive option 2 for the short-term rental project for council consideration that do not include provincial opt-in scenarios and allow some flexibilities for provincial or for residential properties. But, sorry, some residential properties, but balancing short-term rental needs. So now it's even getting a little bit longer. So
So what I was trying to do is get in permanent resident versus principal resident.
yeah, I just put residential properties to leave that vague for staff to deal with that.
I mean, yeah.
That's what residential properties.
Sorry if I may, I think you're kind of maybe getting hung up with the provincial definition of what a permanent resident is, which is not necessarily what our definition would be, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the principal resident, it doesn't necessarily have to be 6 months, it could be just.
There's his principal.
Yeah, I'm saying, but if we're not talking about opting in, the word permanent versus principal doesn't matter too much, I don't think. It's already in the option 2.
Yeah, just further to that, that's very specific residential properties. Staff will come back with scenarios.
Okay, can we live with that? Councilor Orlando.
Yeah, your worship, just sort of related question and just a heads up to Mr. Gips, because it relates to bylaw enforcement regarding the question of what does a permanent resident mean and how will we define that? I am wondering if I could get some thoughts from a enforcement perspective on what would be helpful there. For example, one of the things potentially could be homeowner grant. You know, are you applying for a homeowner grant? That's okay. So that has regulatory authority outside of us, and it's not up to us to chase that down. You know, or other similar mechanisms. Is there any thoughts on what would be an ideal way to approach this?
So, Councilor Palmer, do you want to weigh in before I go to staff?
Just on that, it's good. These are really, really important things. But we're trying to give staff some broad stuff. And I think those kind of dialogues has to come back, the implications. Staff will be saying, here's pros and cons of various things. So I don't know that we can nail it down. So I'm not trying to curtail the conversation, but I'm wondering how we get to a broad direction.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask Kenny, if you don't mind, me just giving a broad overview of that scenario for all of us for benefit, just as to what Councilor Lund is asking.
Your worship, high level, yeah, and Director Simon, feel free to weigh in on this as well. I would say that would be one of the methods we potentially consider as a method to determine that, again, permanent principal residence. It is something at this point, because we are still kind of early stages in it, staff haven't kind of explored all opportunities and different ways to draft that policy regulatory process. We definitely could include that as an option. Is that the best? Again, yeah, at least that is something that is more on that, provincially regulated portion. I know under the provincial definition of how they determine it is very broad and very left to interpretation. So it is something that we would have to explore once we kind of get into those policies. But yeah, Director Simon, is there anything else you'd like to add into that?
Your worship, we look at driver's licenses right now, any other forms of identification, kind of similar to someone who's going to go in to vote to make sure that they're providing authentication for where their primary residence and their primary addresses.
Councilor Cherry?
I just want to get back to the motion. I don't think the terminology using residential properties works. I'm happy to put an and that afterwards, which kind of incorporates what I'm trying to get across here, which again is for the flexibility of permanent residents on site. Again, I don't get into the weeds. That's my goal here with the flexibility, the merging between option 2 and 3.
Okay, so it's not clear in my mind what you're asking here. So can you just elaborate just a bit more on that without getting lengthy? And I'm not trying to be cruel about it, because I want to make sure that we get this right in direction too.
Can I have the motion read? Sorry. If I get
Yeah.
the motion read back to you, I can.
I've tightened it a little bit.
Okay, good.
I move that staff prepare a less restrictive option 2 for the short-term rental project that excludes provincial opt-in scenarios and allows for some flexibility for residential properties. I have the same question as you do, Mayor Souls, because it seems that with that motion, it still allows that dialogue to come back, and I think staff have heard it.
Can you live with that, Councillor Cherry?
I don't think that terminology, if I can, through the chair, Director Simon, how do you feel about that terminology at the end of that motion?
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, we'll be drafting, staff have a good understanding now, and the one thing I'm walking away with is don't develop a policy scenario that includes opting into the principal residence requirement at the provincial level. So we're kind of going to be getting into the semantics now of drafting of what this goal ultimately looks like. The terminology, I don't have major concerns. We'll be drafting the same policy scenarios, whether it's residential properties, permanent residents. I think we understand the gist of where council's getting to.
Okay, then I just want to make it clear that I'm not certain. I don't want to have a policy come back where we have full home STRs. That's my big one here. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish with, again, it's your motion.
Yeah, so Mayor Souls, and I think you seconded, I don't disagree with you. In fact, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
And that's why those qualifier words allow some flexibility. Let staff come back, because we're going to need to nail it. The policy stuff, it's going to be nailed down. That's when we really get into the weeds.
And if it comes back and you don't like the policies because it involves whole home, then we just say, kick it back, fix it.
I'll make some noise for sure.
Exactly. It's not important at this stage to have the terminology exactly right, because we're still gonna have to approve the policies.
Perfect, thanks.
Mr. Simon, comment.
Your worship, sorry, no intent to interject here. Just for clarification, with this resolution, the intent is for staff to draft a new goal, bring that goal back at the next council meeting, further debate, and then once council endorses a goal, then we would move on to the policy drafting. I just want to clarify that that's the overall intent here, correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, okay. So, Ms. Delasella, are you comfortable with that resolution? You kind of got that down?
Certainly, one moment, Your Worship. That staff prepare a less restrictive option 2 for the short-term rental project that excludes the provincial opt-in and allows for some flexibility for residential properties to participate.
Is that the final
Yeah, the only word that I had in provincial opt-in scenarios excludes provincial opt-in scenarios. Pretty minor, yeah, but that's it.
Okay, good. Okay, so you've got that now. All right. I think we've debated this, so it gives Mr. Simon some flexibility and some movement forward. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? This motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Mr. Simon. I appreciate that. All right. Moving forward here, flipping all my pages. I think, what's that? We're going back to camera. So, Ms. Delasella, any questions from the press?
From the press, Your Worship.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask council to go back into in camera pursuant to section 90.1E, and I'll include 90.2B of the community charters in case we want to discuss that. So I'm going to make that motion for me, Councilor Lucio, Councilor Devlin. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We'll take a couple-minute break and come back in camera momentarily.